Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Robertson, and welcome to another channel update video. As most of you are now aware, the Space Engineers Into the Unknown series officially came to an end earlier this year, with the last ever episode released back in June, and what an incredible journey it has been. As promised, shortly after I uploaded the final episode of Season 3, I also released a slightly edited and vanilla-friendly world save, so that everyone that's been following the series can mess around with the colony world of Terra Nova, as well as many of the creations that were featured in the last few episodes. And I've also included a few Easter eggs for anyone clever enough to find them, including a hint at a possible future series set within the same universe, which, from what I've seen, only one person so far has been able to find. Speaking of Space Engineers, there's been some big changes to the game since the series came to an end, with Keen Software House releasing both an economy update that adds NPC factions that can be traded with, and new safe zone mechanics. But recently there's also been a second decoration pack released, along with a new scenario by Smokki that showcases a lot of the new decorative blocks and their features. While new cosmetic content is always welcome, I'm still hopeful that Keen will one day release another free update that fleshes out the combat in the game, such as a rebalance to the armor system, fire control and new anti-ship weaponry to help reduce the reliance on unbalanced modded weaponry or the turret spam we're currently seeing in many of the creations in the workshop these days, but which also still adds some cosmetic options to those weapons for those of us that are willing to splash out a few more bucks to help fund further development, both on Space Engineers itself and any future endeavours that Keen Software House may have planned. Likewise, Empyrion Galactic Survival has seen some changes too recently with their Alpha 10 release, which has added shields, faster drilling speeds for players and hover vehicles, and also the addition of more than 100 new building block shapes. That way, the more creative of you out there can finally get your designs to look even more spectacular. What you will have to watch out for, however, is that they've added new base attacks and AI improvements to go along with it. That's right, the bad guys will now not only use a demolition tool to cut through your base, but once they get close enough to your core, they can use their new hacking tool to eventually take it over and use it for themselves, which means that, unless you're very careful, you could well end up having to fight to retake your own base. And with some upcoming changes to the small vessel aerodynamics and improved heads-up displays, this is one definitely worth keeping track of as development continues. Now, some of you may recall a few months ago I mentioned a multiplayer survival sandbox game called Atlas, which was essentially a pirate-themed version of Ark Survival Evolved. For those of you who may have trouble remembering, I called it out for being an unfinished, buggy, unplayable mess of a game, which should never have been released in such a state, which is something that I still stand by to this day. But, as with No Man's Sky, I also said that if the developers worked their asses off and tried to improve it, then I could potentially give it a shot at some point down the line. And, as luck would have it, Atlas was available during a sale recently for only $7.85, so I decided to buy it and check it out for myself, as many of you here had mentioned that there had apparently been some major improvements made to the game, as well as the addition of single player and co-op. And I'm glad to say that it's been really good fun. Again, it's still very far from perfect, but it's certainly come a long way since release, and with the addition of wild pirate encampments, which are essentially enemy NPC strongholds, as well as some huge improvements to gameplay and stability, I've been finding both Atlas and even another similar game called Conan Exiles to be something that I can just play for a couple of hours and chill out to on the occasional evening, either solo or with a small group of friends. Yes, I know a lot of you are probably saying, "No, Robertson, what are you doing? They're for massive multiplayer raiding and griefing, not for chilling out and building stuff. That's not the way those games are meant to be played." Yeah, well, I'll play my games the way I want in my limited spare time, and if you guys don't like it, well, that's just too bad. And for those of you who haven't played either Atlas or Conan Exiles, and are interested in checking those two games out before you buy them, however, you can find some pretty good YouTube videos on both of those games done by the amazing Phlinger Phoo and the equally talented Firespark81. I'll provide a link to the respective channels in the description below. Now, while I was going through the usual dross in my list of recommendations on Steam, I stumbled across an absolute gem of a game called Void Destroyer 2. This one is essentially a space sandbox game in which the player starts out in first person playing as a cybernetically altered pilot of a small one-man fighter, but through time you have the potential to eventually rise up to command an entire space fleet from either a cruiser or carrier in third person, or from one of your many bases in a strategic map view. The best way of describing this game would be as a mixture of the classic games Freelancer and Homeworld, but with a retro sci-fi version of the overworld view for Mountain Blade thrown in, which is used instead of travelling everywhere in first person, as you normally do in games such as the X series or Elite Dangerous. Now, you have to remember that this game is still in early access as of the time I'm recording this, and is still a little rough around the edges despite the fact that it has been in development for a few good years already. But given that it's only been worked on by one guy with just a little help from people hired to do some of the assets for him, it's nothing short of spectacular, and is already in a better state than some AAA titles were on launch. If you can look past the retro cel-shaded graphics, the somewhat dodgy dialogue and frustrating storyline missions, then this could be well worth checking out. I can certainly say I've had many hours of enjoyment playing this hidden gem and look forward to seeing how it looks on release. Another game in development that I've been watching quite closely, as many of you are probably already aware of by now, is Cyberpunk 2077 by CD Projekt Red, which for those of you who don't know, are the same people who brought you the Witcher series of games, and if they're anything to go by, then you know that this one is going to be good. After watching a few videos on YouTube, I'm getting a very Blade Runner or Deus Ex vibe from this upcoming title, which is always a good thing, and I'm looking forward to seeing more in-game footage of this as time goes by. Besides, from what I've seen, Keanu Reeves is now playing one of the in-game characters, and anything that's got a cyborg John Wick kicking ass in it is always going to be a good shout. Yeah, here's hoping he doesn't turn out to be one of the bad guys we end up having to fight against. Finally, and this one came as something as a surprise to me when it was announced, but Arma 3 has recently released another DLC, a spin-off expansion named Contact. It features a new campaign in which the player takes on the role of a specialist working in the fictional Eastern European country of Livonia, as part of a joint wargames exercise between NATO and the Livonian Armed Forces, when all of a sudden strange things start to occur and everything suddenly goes off in a very X-Files sort of direction. As well as adding a new campaign and 163 kilometers of new terrain, it also comes with a couple of new vehicles, including a tractor, for all you folks that always wanted to roleplay a farmer out there, a few more weapons and new gear including a radio backpack and spectrum device. I've only just started playing this DLC and so far it's looking to be very interesting indeed, so if you're needing a break from some serious mill simming or ultra serious VBS training exercises, then this could be well worth a look. But just remember, the truth is out there. To watch the skies, and it's aliens! Yeah, well, that pretty much covers it with regards to games, so moving on swiftly, it's now time for this video's Q&A segment. The first question comes from two people, in fact, that have asked the same thing, a Travis Orich and Rabin's Child, who ask, do you have plans for another series like Space Engineers Into the Unknown? And the answer to that is, yes, I do actually have plans to do another Space Engineers series at some point, and there's even an LCD that hints at it, which is hidden in the Season 3 game world that I released on the workshop. But bear in mind that it'll most likely just be for one season and won't be started for at least a few more years, as I'm currently working on several other projects at this time. The next question comes from Matthew Clark, who asks, what are you planning on doing now, and are any of the ships from your series going to be on the Steam Workshop? The answer to that is, I'm not planning on releasing any new ships on the workshop, and most of what was included in the series can already be found in the Season 3 world save. If you're having trouble finding anything, then just use the admin menu and cycle through all the available entities until you can find what you're looking for. I have released some of the smaller vessels, such as the Wyvern and the Griffin on the workshop, along with their civilian variants, but I don't really have plans to release anything else from that particular series on the workshop, at least not at this time. What I will say though is that I'm currently working on an updated version of the Season 2 world save, which I plan to release as a new scenario, set about a year after the events of Into the Unknown. It will feature a new research colony that was built not too far away from Red Mountain Base, and will also expand a little more into the story of why the Thalia left Tau Ceti so abruptly as they did, as well as contain the economy update and a few challenges for the player to overcome. But there will be more on that later on, as right now I'm still trying to get my head around the scripting used in Space Engineers, which is a little harder than you may think, especially when you've got tutorial videos like this.
It will go from here to that node. So for example, you can do like this. You could do this.
Yeah, so watch this space. The next question comes from Steve Harding, who asks, what are your thoughts on Star Citizen, and would you consider doing a series on that? The answer to that is, I was sceptical to begin with, but it seems to be shaping up to be quite an impressive game. I'm still not sure if it's something that will appeal to me right now, as it's primarily multiplayer focused and looks as though it could end up being a massive time sink, and that's not really feasible for me right now. But I'll certainly keep an eye on it and maybe invest in it later on down the line if things change. The next question comes from Cara Ellsworth, who asks, I just saw the end credits for Into the Unknown. Did you really play all those characters? And the answer to that is, yes I did. As luck would have it, I'm an actual voice actor. Self-taught though, not professional. Unfortunately, I rarely perform much these days, so I do enjoy the opportunity, and doing the voices for all those extra characters in Into the Unknown was actually really good fun, as some of them were new ones that I'd been practicing on for a while. I was hoping to get a few more voice actors on board for the final season, but I had to settle on just a few close friends and family members, including my amazing sister-in-law, as everyone else that had sent in the recordings were either just way too young, or the mic quality just wasn't that great. But what we ended up with worked out really well, and I'm very pleased with the result. The next question comes from Fire Ronin, who asks, why don't you like MMOs? And the answer to that is, it's not that I don't like them. You have to remember that I'm no longer in my teens or 20s, and haven't been for quite some time, so it's just that I've evolved past the point where they hold the same appeal to me. Plus, in most cases, all you're doing with an MMO is renting a game rather than buying one. What this means is that you're paying or investing time in something that could end up having the plug pulled on it by the publisher at any moment, especially if it's no longer making them enough money or if they want to promote a newer game. A good example would be with what happened to Star Wars Galaxies or City of Heroes. Another reason why I'm not a huge fan of MMOs is that I much prefer to play online with a small group of friends or people that I know, rather than with large groups of complete strangers. More so these days, as my free time is much more limited, so spending it putting up with annoying teenagers or adults with antisocial personality disorders, unfortunately is really not my idea of fun. A good example of this was that a few months ago I tried out a game called Gloria Victis, which I'd backed some years ago, but the chat window seemed to be filled with people hurling abuse at each other, including someone called Sarek who seemed to get a kick out of trolling a lot of the other players in, which I can only assume was his guild, just because they didn't like to play the game the same way he did. So yeah, I don't really have time for twats like that, and they'd ruin any footage that I'd try to record. I'd probably have to blur out the chat window the whole time, and don't even get me started on voice chat in those sorts of games. The next question comes from Mystic Man, who asks, what got you into survival sandbox games? That's a good question. In a way, I've always been interested in those sorts of games, even the early open world ones like Hunter, The Adventures of Robin Hood and the original GTA, but they were very limited as you couldn't really build anything and there weren't any real survival features until Stranded came along in 2003. Unfortunately, they were all very basic and far and few between, but all that changed once Minecraft and especially modded Minecraft came along. Shortly after that came games like Rust, Ark, Space Engineers, and a few others that have come and gone. But what I have found is that once you get your teeth into a good open-world survival sandbox game that lets you create a lot of your own content from scratch, it's very difficult to go back to a game that doesn't. A younger version of me would have loved Elite Dangerous and played it non-stop. But after playing something like Empyrion or Space Engineers, where you can build your own ships and bases, walk around inside your own creations, and even visit the surface of other planets and moons, going back to games like Elite Dangerous or even one of the X series just feels too shallow or restrictive in comparison now. So be warned, ladies and gentlemen, once you get into survival sandbox games, you'll find it hard to go back. The next question comes from Nidhogg301, who asks, Kickstarter projects and crowdfunding, are you for or against? Now my answer to that is I'm mostly for them, but only tentatively. It's a good thing for indie developers that have realistic goals, expectations, knowledge and commitment, but need that initial funding to make it work. But it also gives cowboys and inexperienced dreamers, or even worse, con artists, a way to grab the hard-earned cash from well-meaning people and either release a rushed, incomplete mess, or just vanish with your money, never to be heard from again. The best advice I can offer is to do some research on the people asking for crowdfunding and make sure you never donate any more than you can afford to lose if it all goes down the drain. Hope for the best, but expect the worst and all that. But whatever you do, never get on the hype train. Always be wary of an unknown or relatively new company promising you the next big thing. Now, I'm not saying don't get excited about anything, just that it's best to just stay cautiously optimistic, and don't be too surprised if it all comes crashing down. Starforge, anyone? And tonight's final question comes from CrazyDutchman94, who asks, Bethesda, what's happened to them, and do you have any thoughts? Well, my answer to that is, unfortunately, I think what's happened to Bethesda is a combination of things including arrogance, greed, corruption, and it's only made worse by the fact that they've somehow managed to fall out of touch with their core consumer base. In a way, I'm more sad and disappointed with them rather than angry, and I don't really want to go into depth about what they've done wrong and indeed what some larger companies such as EA have already been doing for quite some time, as other YouTubers such as Legacy Killer HD and Clean Prince Gaming have already pretty much covered that topic already, and I agree with most of what they've said. What we need to understand, and anyone that's taught, studied or worked in marketing will tell you, is that as consumers we have the power to punish this sort of bad behaviour by making sure that we do not pre-order and, if necessary, just don't buy their products. If you hit a profit-making company where it hurts, i.e. their wallet, you'll find that they'll quickly change how they go about their business. Especially when they see that same business being taken by the more scrupulous competitors that treat consumers as human beings and not as mere cash cows. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, if enough of you stand up and say enough is enough, you can make a difference. Anyway, that pretty much concludes this session's Q&A segment and indeed tonight's channel update video. Hopefully I'll release another one around Christmas time, so until next time, I'd like to thank all my incredible viewers and subscribers out there, and I look forward to seeing you all again in the next video. So until next time, this is Robertson, signing off.